Hello and most welcome to Heidegger 1771 to have it correct. I will finish off the summary of Warren D. Goldfarb. I want me to give me a slab. I want you to bring me a slab. I will take a look at a comment I got from Paul Johnston regarding aspect blindness. And then I will take the first start on a new article by Eugene Fisher. But we start out with Warren D. Goldfarb. We've been looking into how Goldfarb views Augustine's reaction and claim that the words are signifying something out there in the world that you, for instance, can give an ostensive definition. And the last thing I mention here that we do not see or simply blurt out, this is not language. That is itself a datum, not to be ignored. And to continue, this is a comment from page 272. This reluctance, just give me a second here, sorry. That reluctance is itself a datum. I think that's a very important point here. It's a blunt assertion. That is not a language. As we've seen earlier under reading 1, there's no question about the word for word accuracy of Augustine's remarks. Under reading 2, however, we are uneasy and hesitate to apply the notion of naming some object as well as presumably those of wishing to point a thing out, state of mind, and the like. What creates the reluctance, the difference between the two readings, is the abrogation of the rest of language. This suggests that our everyday applications of these notions presuppose the surroundings provided by the rest of language. Given that the surroundings are in place, we can use these notions without reservation to mark out various distinctions. When the surroundings are removed, the notions no longer operate quite rightly. Thus, the relation of paragraph 2 to Augustine's remarks is far from straightforward. Wittgenstein's note that the builders provide a case for which the description given by Augustine is correct has a double edge. Augustine's remarks can be trivial. If we take the notions that figure in it to be operating locally. The trouble comes when we segment the description, that is, when we take naming, wishing to point, and so on, as if they picked out isolatable phenomena whose character can be given independently of any surrounding structure. This idea of surroundings is connected to why the double aspect of Augustine's remarks arises in philosophical contexts. To take the notions Augustine invokes as figuring in a general account of language is to take them as picking out particular phenomena that are crucially, perhaps foundationally, at stake in the operation of language. These phenomena in and of themselves then become the focus of theorizing. Thus, for example, in paragraph 6, Wittgenstein talks of the connection between word and thing. His remarks there are intended not to deny that attributions of reference to words make sense, but rather to expose a slide that results in giving the word-thing connection a special place underlying the use of language as the essential item in the explanation of understanding. When this sort of thing happens, the notions are construed as operating on their own, independently of the rest of the structure, for it is they that ground the structure. Our considerations about paragraph 2 thus suggests that what is involved in undertaking such general accounts is already a large move. In his investigations of the notions that can play a role here, Wittgenstein intends to give this altogether too broad characterization content by teasing out the ways in which these notions are illicitly taken as separable when exploited for certain ends. Now, one lesson we are to learn from Wittgenstein is that there is no accurate general characterization of how one can go wrong. We can expect no systematic account of what it is to treat notions in isolations from the surroundings that ordinarily give them life. Further insight can be gained only by detailed examination of cases. I shall consider one such examination that in paragraphs 19 to 20, which poses the question of how words are meant. In paragraphs 19 and 20, Wittgenstein examines what I have called the notion of the animation of language by thought, by looking at the relations among the builders called Slab. Our command, Slab, and our sentence, bring me a slab. Here he is using our hesitations regarding the language of paragraph 2 to raise questions about our language, and in particular about what our meaning, our words consists in. It disperses the fog to consider the builders, not because such primitive languages settle anything directly, but because they force certain questions back on us. The things the interlocutor says in these sections have a very commonplace air. Our order, slab, is elliptical for bring me a slab. When I say slab, I mean bring me a slab. When I say slab, I want that you should bring me a slab, and so on. Wittgenstein does not deny these commonplaces, but seeks to show that the interlocutor, in taking them to evidence something deep about language, is putting them on a burden they cannot bear. The interlocutor starts by claiming that the builder's call is not our command, since our command is elliptical for bring me a slab. He is trying to locate our uneasiness with the builders in something specific about their calls, as opposed to our sentences, that is, in something finer than the overarching fact that the builders' lives are, after all, different from ours. Wittgenstein agrees that our one-word command is elliptical, as it surely is. But how does this humdrum observation show a difference between it and the builder's call? The interlocutor responds that the conclusion follows simply because the builder's language does not contain the longer sentence. The interlocutor must then be construing the ellipticality of our command slab for bring me a slab to imply that the functioning of the former is parasitic on that of the latter. He conceives of our one-word command as a conventionally shortened form of the real sentence, "Bring me a slab." Something is left out in the former, and we are in some way more accurate when we put it back by filling in the ellipses. He is claiming that any account of what we do with a shortened sentence must go by way of the longer one. Our command slab can function as it does because it is at bottom the longer sentence. The interlocutor here is headed towards a philosophical theory of language. Agreement with his characterization of the relation between the shorter and longer sentences will rapidly drive towards the idea of there being a full sense of our sentences, or a proposition, as some have put it. Versus what is obtained when all of the ellipses have been filled in. To block this drive at the start, Wittgenstein will call our attention to the ways in which the notion of ellipticality, when construed in this way, is groundless. Thus he asks, with an innocent air, why we don't take the one-word command as the basic form and the longest sentence to be conventionally lengthened. If we do this, there's no bar to identifying the builder's call with our command. Why is the longest sentence to be taken as the standard? The interlocutor answer that it is because you really mean the longest sentence when you utter the shorter sentence. Again, in one tone of voice, this is a triviality. The interlocutor, however, is in effect emphasizing really, and is thereby voicing the deep-seated conviction that the longest sentence has some sort of priority. He is construing, yes, indeed. He is construing really meaning as a relation to something. The something here is the longest sentence as opposed to the shorter. In the philosophical, not so long run, that something turns out to be the full sense, or the thought in its entirety, which may well go beyond the sentence as uttered. To point out the need for some support for taking such talk of really meaning as showing that one form of the sentence is more basic than the other, Wittgenstein dismissively asks, do you say the unshortened sentence to yourself? The answer is of course no. All that can be concluded is that the two sentences mean the same, and that the shorter one is, well, shorter. Wittgenstein even asks, why should I not say when he says slab, he means slab? Now, we normally do not say such things. Perhaps then we should pause at this question, for it suggests that the interlocutor could, although he does not, point out the following. We say, when he says slab, he means bring me a slab, but not when he says slab, he means slab. Nor do we say, when he says bring me a slab, he means slab. Surely this shows that the longer sentence is a more accurate locus of meaning. But how does this show that? We say, when he says X, he means Y, in response to a question when something about the utterance is unclear. It is hard to imagine a case in which we would be unclear about bring me a slab, yet would have understood had slab been said. Hence, the shorter sentence is not in general useful for explaining the longer. This is an innocent observation, but the interlocutor concludes that the shorter sentence depends on the longer one. Of course, there's a jump here that amounts to an implicit adoption of an in-choate conception of full sense. for the full sense represents the complete explanation of meaning, the one that handles any unclarity that could possibly arise. The assumption of such a final resting point provides a notion of a direction of analysis. It is this notion that funds the interlocutor's claim that "bring me a slab" is more basic than slab. Now Wittgenstein criticizes this conception in many ways. He challenges the idea of complete explanation and all possible unclarities, and denies that questions and doubts elicit something already there, somehow in the original sentence. These criticisms, however, need not to be rehearsed here. For the present task is to show that the observations we make about meaning, when we stick to the descriptive level, do not by themselves substantiate the interlocutor's claims. If these claims are substantiated when we import a conception of full sense or something tantamount to it, a philosophical picture of the essence of language is ever the were one, then that is enough. Clearly, in parenthesis, no one Wittgensteinian attack of the sort I am discussing could be conclusive. A defender of the conception under attack can, at each juncture, claim that something else, not the putative fact under consideration, furnishes its true support. But enough cases like this will surely make these disavowals ring hollow. In any case, the interlocutor of paragraph 19 does not invoke features of how we explain what we mean. He takes a different tack. To show that something about the one-word command can be gotten at only via the four-word one, the interlocutor says, when I call Slab, then what I want is that he should bring me a slab. Again, Wittgenstein agrees to the commonplace, but challenges its efficacy. The interlocutor is speaking as if the wanting had isolatable parts corresponding to the longer sentence, and I would say that is an excellent remark. He passes from a certain description of the speaker's desires to something about the real sentence. But what is the justification for this move? Note, by the way, that we can equally well say, when I say slab, I want a slab, or when I say slab, I want him to obey the command slab. The various ways we can transform the description here constitute no evidence for taking one sentence rather than the other as basic. In trying to base his claim on what the utterer of slab wants, the interlocutor is taking here to be an object of wanting versus a state of affairs that is wanted and that has a specific character given by a canonical verbal description. Wittgenstein asks for the grounds for such a construal of the wanting. The question with which Wittgenstein concludes paragraph 19 suggests that the construal is grounded only if the utterer of slab in some sense thinks the longer sentence. Clearly, however, no such conscious thought is in general present. Hence, the construal either is groundless or else relies upon some notion of unconscious or implicit thought. And in the latter case, the interlocutor is simply presupposing what he needs to substantiate. He must support the idea that the one-word command depends on the four-word command. But to assert that unconscious or implicit thought of the longer sentence always occurs is already to assume that "bring me a slab" is a more accurate expression of the elliptical command slab. It is to assume that our operation with slab are mediated by some more basic relation to "bring me a slab." Yet, if we cannot rely on a basic level of language, what we mean, what it is to mean, "bring me a slab" itself, that is to mean the longer form. In paragraph 20, the interlocutor suggests a plausible answer. It is to use the sentence in contrast with other sentences that share some of these words, like bring him a slab, bring me a pillar, etc. I shall call these other sentences variants. The interlocutor's suggestion may seem obviously right, but it can give rise to yet another philosophical conception. the idea that the meaning of the sentence is constructed out of something specific located in each word. Something that can be gleaned from contrasts with those variants in which that word alone is replaced, and that tells what is done in using just this word as opposed to the alternatives. It is not far to the idea that we understand the sentence by grasping its constituents and seeing how they are combined. However, when using a sentence in contrast to its variants, is taken to ground the notion of how we mean a sentence, it appears that to use a sentence in contrast is to perform an act that explains the speaker's uttering the sentence. Here, as before, Wittgenstein notes that no introspectable features of mental life support such a localization of using it in contrast in a particular act. The absence of such introspectibilia highlights the jump that has been made in ascribing a certain character to the otherwise unobjectionable notion of using in contrast, for it indicates that this ascription rests on no facts whatsoever. Wittgenstein adduces the following further considerations to undermine the ascriptions. The usual talk surrounding particular acts is inapplicable. Questions like, do all the variants enter into the act? And when does it happen? Seem completely inappropriate. Wittgenstein then points out that we say we use the sentence in contrast because our language contains the variance. It is, of course, a truism that we could not use a sentence in contrast to others if the others were not available. Wittgenstein means more, however. To say one uses the sentences in contrast to the variance is to say no more than that the language contains these variants, and when one utters the given sentence, one is not uttering the variants. The whole content of our talk of using a sentence in contrast lies in the availability of alternatives in our language. There is no particular act which is the using in contrast, except for the utterance of the sentence itself. Very good. And we put it into pause there. So we'll continue on the Strudden path with Warren D. Goldfarb. Sorry about the retake, but this text is demanding, taxing on one. And as usual, it's well worth the offer. Proper understanding has, with no doubt, escaped the ones who take meaning is use theory at heart. For instance, Kripke and Heidegger. And I think Goldfarb is indicating that if you do that, you lose all of Wittgenstein. So these we are talking about maybe, or at least I'm pretty sure that Kripke has meaning as use. Some of the most famous philosophers that have been during the 20th century. Kripke has even been to Gothenburg, and I think there was some mentioning that he was an Orthodox Jew and he couldn't pass bridges other than in a certain order. But I'm not too sure about that. Maybe it's a tale, but he was here. We'll continue, and it's interesting, when one utters the given sentence, one is not uttering the variance. The whole content of our talk of using a sentence in contrast lies in the availability of alternatives in our language. There's no particular act which is the using in contrast, except for the utterance of the sentence itself. It might be objected that we do have a richer notion of using a sentence in contrast to others. That is, when I have thought about whether to write quite talented rather than very talented in a letter of recommendation, exactly so, but in specific settings like these, we have the particular facts that anchor the using in contrast. The act of choosing is visible. There are specific alternatives and questions like when does it happen are answerable. And the interlocutor's notion is not like this. He is talking of using the sentence in contrast as a general phenomenon, as always occurring. With the contrast class including all the possible variants. And there are no facts that could ground a notion of particular sort of act. Nothing is being added to the description, I said these words and meant them. Thus, the interlocutor may be charged with illicitly importing features that emerge in special contexts into an overly general notion. However, the diagnosis may be taken further. Wittgenstein claims that, in general, no more is going on than that I said this sentence and I meant it. though I could have said any of those other sentences, but didn't. One wants to object that more must be going on. For the fact that I could have said those other sentences but didn't bespeaks something. The notion of using in contrast gives what lies behind my saying this sentence and not those others. There must be something behind my utterances to explain why I make them rather than others that are available to me. I must in some way be constantly weighing, checking, and selecting my words, just as I do consciously when I write letters of recommendation, either acts of picking or something like picking, but not exactly picking. Go on all the time, or else I am not speaking, I am only mooing. The Wittgensteinian response to all this would be to scrutinize both the picture of rational language use at work here, including the picture of rationality it embodies, and the felt need for explanations of our utterances. Why, after all, isn't my meaning what I say explanation enough? What is to be secured by demanding something further? Is there anything that, in the end, would satisfy these demands? Questions like these surface frequently in the investigations, for Wittgenstein sees the desire for explanation as operating powerfully, pervasively, and misleadingly in philosophy. With regard to paragraph 20, however, we need only say that desire is operating prematurely. To rely on unexplored presuppositions about the nature of rational language use is to assume far too much about the subject that we are supposed to be investigating from the ground up. Once again, then, Wittgenstein has tried to show that what we all agree to concerning meaning does not by itself support the idea that what I mean picks out a privileged sentence. A sentence whose internal features will explain how my utterance does its job. When we recognize this, it is no longer dangerous to speak of a sentence being elliptical. Such talk does not commit us to thinking that the sentence leaves something out that I supply by meaning it. Slab is elliptical for bring me a slab because they mean the same and the former is shorter. The feeling that the former leaves something out arises from the fact that, given the whole of our language, certain forms, like the latter, can be taken as paradigmatic. Forms, for example, that can forestall unclarities in a wide enough range of circumstances, or forms that simply are familiar enough and used frequently enough. As the occurrences of enough indicates, there are no absolutely paradigmatic forms. Ellipticality does not point to any notion of the complete content of our words, that which may go beyond the words as uttered, and which those words in some ultimate way express. In short, that two sentences have the same sense does not imply that there is a privileged way of expressing that sense. Indeed, in the last paragraph of paragraph 20, Wittgenstein puts off a request for just such a privileged verbal expression, with the observation that what it comes to for the two expressions to have the same sense is that they have the same use. It might be objected that this is false, and that indeed no two sentences have exactly the same use, since there will inevitably be some occasions where one would be employed but not the other. The reply to this is not simply that Wittgenstein means more or less the same use. To ascribe sameness of sense to two sentences is to say that they have features of their application in common. What features might be essential to the ascription is not given beforehand, for that depends on our aims in the classification and on reasons we are talking in the particular context of sense at all. Indeed, I would argue that there is no general notion of use, and I would claim that Wittgenstein agrees. For such reasons, I do not read his notorious definition of meaning as use in paragraph 43 as a definition or as explanatory or as suggesting a use-based theory of meaning. This reading is closely connected with taking Wittgenstein not to be a behaviorist. It should be clear that he is not. Then little can be made of talk of use simpliciter. Given that invoking use by itself carries little information, I take his remark in paragraph 43 to be, by and large, a denial of the possibility and appropriateness of theorizing about meaning. In sum, Wittgenstein is concerned in paragraphs 19 to 20 with ways of which philosophical questions about meaning can arise. His point may perhaps be summarized by a remark from the Zettel, paragraph 16. The mistake is to say that there is anything that meaning something consists in. Yet, of course, he is hardly denying that we can and do mean sentences in various ways. Rather, he is trying to get us to resist the impulse to localize meaning something in a specific act or event. Admittedly, it is no easy matter to pin down precisely what the denial of this status to meaning something amounts to. Partly, Wittgenstein is urging that the answer to a question of how a sentence is meant depends on no one thing or few things in particular, but rather on the variety of features of the utterance and the utterer. And on the circumstances in which the question is asked. More important, Wittgenstein is denying that the notion of meaning something supports certain conceptions of language, and in particular that it supports the idea that there is the thing that is meant, which could be the content or the relatum of the act. In taking meaning amiss, Wittgenstein charges we illicitly use the ways we have of talking about the surface level of mental life in talking of notions like meaning, wanting, and understanding. His pointing to the lack of introspectable phenomena of the appropriate sorts is a way to show that an unwarranted step has been taken. It is this step, rather than any specifically mentalistic theory, that he wishes to undercut. To use his term of art, it is a question of the grammar of crucial notions like meaning. Given certain misunderstandings of that grammar, a naive philosopher might attempt a mentalistic account, but reactions to mentalism seek only to replace one explanans with another, and hence rely on the same presuppositions about the explanandum. Indeed, the move Wittgenstein discerns, here as elsewhere, is not tied to any developed philosophical view. Rather, it is made on the way into philosophizing. Once it's made, there will be questions that philosophers will begin to debate, notions that philosophers will begin to refine. Wittgenstein wishes to snap such debates off before they begin by showing that at the start we have misread the facts. He is indicating the groundlessness of our insistence that these facts expressed in commonplaces we all agree to point inevitably to the notions that are the subject of philosophical debate. As we've seen, he does this by constantly challenging the ways we might want to exploit the commonplaces. By themselves, the commonplaces are perfectly unobjectionable. That is why Wittgenstein can claim in paragraph 305 that he's not denying anything. Yet every time we try to make something of them, it turns out that a jump has been made. We have already assumed a special interpretation of the commonplaces. This raises the question of where the insistence that the facts must be so read comes from. That question in turn can serve to uncover unexamined preconceptions, proto-picture of thought as animating language, of what explanations of meaning must rest on of the nature of rational language use, etc. His point then is that these preconceptions affect what we take as data. When we read the commonplaces through philosophically tinted spectacles. Of course, such proto-pictures are powerful and cannot simply be dismissed. In a sense, the opening sections of the investigations set an agenda. To substantiate the charge that philosophers groundlessly misconstrue the commonplace, Wittgenstein must go on to investigate further aspects of what he sees as fuel for such misconstruals. It is the subtle and interwoven nature of these factors that makes the investigations appear to proceed crisscross in every direction. The opening sections of the investigations, though, have the crucial role of bringing to light that there is something to be examined at this level. What makes it possible for philosophizing even to begin is a decisive move that is ordinarily unrecognized, very natural, and hard to conceive of avoiding. Wittgenstein is trying to expose the distance between how we take matters when we first start philosophizing and what we really have to go on. It is not easy to recognize this, and it may be far more difficult to accept the pictureless view of things that such a recognition entails. I will take some quotes. I'm just going to put this pause there. So a lot of the most important is already mentioned in the start of philosophical investigations, and also here mentioned by Goldfarb. So this takeout from 266. The interlocutor does not voice developed philosophical positions. He is not a sophisticated Phrygian or Tractarian. who puts forward some tenet P of his system, to which Wittgenstein counters not P. That is so important. This feature is sometimes characterized as Wittgenstein's interests in unmasking temptations. Talk of temptations has its good points. It indicates that Wittgenstein seeks not so much to propose an alternative to such and such a philosophical theory, but to pull the rug out from under the theory. Moreover, it hints that to be successful, Wittgenstein's remarks must exact an acknowledgement that what he has pointed out is what might have led one on. Obtaining such an acknowledgement may require portraying the sources of a philosophical position rather than refuting this position. It may well be more a matter of depiction than of argument. Unmasking temptations, however, is a slogan. Like all Wittgensteinian meta-philosophical slogans, if it is not supported by a detailed account of what is going on in the sections where the work is being done, it can mean anything. That is also very localization. Indeed, the slogan can mislead into suggesting that there are specific theses which play the role of unnoticed premises. For instance, in the Phrygian arguments, which are beguiling but which can be recognized as incorrect or misguided as soon as they are made explicit. Rather, And that is not the case. Be clear about that. Rather, what Wittgenstein wishes to bring to light operates at a more basic level. For in these sections, Wittgenstein is examining what it is to begin looking for a philosophical account of language and meaning. The decisive moves in the conjuring trick do not amount to specific theses held by this or that philosopher. They are made without notice at the point in the course of philosophizing far earlier than the development of a particular position. Thus, I see the opening of the investigations as crucially concerned with exhibiting such an early stage and with evoking its character. So that's the second incredibly important point. And I think I fell into that trap as well. There is no underlying explainable thesis, not even a proto-thesis, but rather there's a move. And that move, once it's done, it's irrevocable until philosophical investigations settle the Brown Book, remarks on the philosophy of psychology, and many, many more of his later writings, which were quite extensive. All this is still not far beyond the level of slogans. There's no way of fleshing it out, but to scrutinize Wittgenstein's words. Hence, it is to the text that I now turn. And he's turning to the beginning of the text. Let's go down to Frege here, a bit down on page 267. To say of Frege that he does not recognize differences in kinds of words is to ignore the centrality to his thought of his distinction between saturated and unsaturated expressions. To say that Frege takes the meaning in the ordinary sense of a word to be what it names is to misread him blindly. For Frege gives Bedeutung a special meaning and emphasizes the role in what we unreflectively call the meaning of a word of both Bedeutung and Sinn. Moreover, to attribute this conception to the early Wittgenstein is to miss what he himself calls his Grundgedanke, that the logical constants do not stand for anything. Now, it might be said that although this so-called Augustinian conception is not particularly true to these or other modern thinkers, these thinkers share enough of the conception that their differences with it are a mere matter of detail. That is to say that their actual theories of language are not what is at issue. I think, in fact, that Wittgenstein is suggesting this. But it surely does not do to use the label Augustinian conception at will and then take any considerations against its crude features as directly refuting or undermining the philosophers so labeled. The task is to figure out on what level Wittgenstein might be operating that would make details unimportant, and that there is about a crude conception like this that carries over to sophisticated theorizing. So it's not a thesis beyond all things or beneath all things. Neither is it about a proto-thesis. It is a move, and once done, it cannot easily become undone. So he doesn't have a position that is Wittgenstein in these questions. That does not mean that he is neutral, but that his position is more than a position, it's a pointing out of a move. And that move leads in the end to the establishment of the picture, of meaning, of reference, of the relation between the inner world and the outer world, and so on and so on. So it's important to understand there is no anti-Tractarian movement, there is no anti-Fregean movement or positioning where he says no to what he said. That is absolutely wrong position. And it would be very close to the position that meaning is under all of language, or the position taken by Kripke, I think, that meaning is use, taking use to be something general, something one can always refer to, that is always participating in language in some way, creating meaning, and being this hidden force that makes it possible to understand what is said, written, done, or made. No. So what Goldfarb is doing here is trying to cut a very, very sharp edge. So we almost understood Wittgenstein, but in the finer details and where the understanding comes in is mistaken. And that is a very hard thing to do. And I'm actually thinking this would need another turn on Goldfarb. Sorry to prolong this, but this is way too interesting to give up too early or pre-empty. I say thank you very much. Have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Bye bye for now.